So the video today is going to dissect a really simple statement that gets us into a lot of trouble. And it's a statement, I am anxious. And I want to use a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of neuroscience, and I want to take this apart to see if there's any validity to it. Because just like any illusion, if we treat it as real, it can have consequences that are real. And if we see through its illusionary nature, then the problems go along with it. And so let's take the I part first. So what does it mean to have an I, to be a me, a self? Well, let's look at the problems going on in the world right now. And let's be honest with ourselves. And think about a few months ago, when this was a problem that the other side of the globe was dealing with, were you as anxious as you are now? As this problem came closer and closer to home, did your anxiety increase? Well, if you're honest, you're probably going to say yes. And that's because that's the nature of the self. In fact, we know from something in cognitive science called motivated reasoning that if you're reasoning about a problem and it has to do with you, you literally use a different set of reasons and logic than if you apply the exact same problem to someone else that you don't know who's at a different place. So there is something about the self that seems to be connected and drag problems along with it. And whenever you find an I, you find a problem. And whenever you find a problem, you find an I along with it. That's why I call the book No Self, No Problem. If you see through the nature of the self, all the problems go along with it. So I want to do a little exercise with you to show you what gives rise to this idea of an I, of a self. And it's really similar to a melody. So I'm going to play a real simple melody here. Okay, simple little melody. How did you experience that? Well, if we could take a look at the physical reality, all the notes were different and separate. They existed across time and space. They were unique and individual. And yet somehow consciousness has this ability to glue all those parts together and holistically experience it as a tune. It does the exact same thing with the self. Think of all the different events across time and space that has happened to you and think of them as notes in the melody. When consciousness observes all of these simultaneously, it creates this image of a single entity. So if we ask, well, where's a tune when no one's listening to it? Well, it doesn't exist. That's exactly the nature of the self. If consciousness directs its attention somewhere else, instead of focusing on the ego, all the problems go along with it. Have you ever noticed that in terms of the happiest people in the world, these are people who tend to not focus on their own egos, they focus on others around them. And suddenly they have no problems and they're happy. The people who drag their egos around and consciously invest a lot in who they are tend to be some of the unhappiest people on the planet. And so the first part of this, that I, is created by a quality of consciousness, which is an absolute mystery. In psych, they have some terms like short-term working memory and all this, but those are just words. They don't really know how it processes this and how it takes this information across time and glues it together. The second part is anxiety itself. Well, what is anxiety? Well, we know pretty conclusively that if you look at the nervous system, anxiety and excitement look exactly the same. They have the exact same neurophysiological profile. Increased heart rate, sweating, everything, sympathetic nervous arousal, everything looks the exact same. So how does a person know whether they're excited or whether they're anxious? Well, here's where the left brain plays a role. The left brain looks out and tries to make a conclusion, an interpretation based on the evidence. So if you're watching the news, the conclusion is going to be that you're anxious. If you are looking down at a winning lottery number, you're going to make a completely different conclusion and you're going to assume that you're excited. And so when it comes down to all of this, the next time you are so convinced that you are anxious, think about this for a little bit. Is there you to even be anxious? Where are you focusing your attention? And what does anxious or anxiety even mean? Could it just be an interpretation? So let me know what you think.